Welcome to a video about real-world Delphi projects that are just out of this world. And as the title suggests, today we're going to do something completely different to what I normally do. Today, I'm going to talk to a person from the Delphi community. And just as a brief introduction to David Akerman, I'm hoping I'm not slaughtering the name. I found David through a post on Facebook that he released a couple of days ago. Here in the United States, the NASA is in the public eye right now, not because of another moon landing, no. They're in the media because of their latest Mars Rover project. And what David is saying in his post that Delphi was used in the production of the parachute for the Perseverance Mars rover. That immediately triggered my interest because I live in Florida, so I'm pretty close to NASA, and I've been on site looking at the Apollo launch sites and everything. So I got pretty excited. And then when I saw that they used TMS software components for the touch panel screen user interface, I got even more interested. And brave as I was, I emailed him, and David was so kind to reply to my email. So as it says in this post, Delphi was used in the production of the parachute of the Mars rover. And you might not know what the Mars rover is if you're living under a rock right now, because it's being reported all over the world. So here you see the parachute on top of the Mars rover while it lands on the planet Mars. So without further ado, let's talk to David so he can give us all the details. And from what I heard, this has not been the only project that took Delphi programming out of this world. I'm quite sure David will give us a few details on that. So here we are. Good morning or good afternoon, Dave. It's morning where I am. It's early afternoon where Dave is. Thank you so much for doing this. We're really excited to meet you in person, as good as we can meet somebody in person right now. So, well, I guess we start a little bit by you introducing yourself, how you started with Delphi in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is I've an electronics degree, but almost from before I even got to university, I discovered software, and I've been working on software ever since. I worked through a couple of jobs, and then I worked for a company that made color systems. So they're the kind of things where if you've got a sample, like you take a sample to a DIY store and say, I want a color match for this, they would do the match comparison, and they would also come up with a recipe or formulation for the paint that you want to make. And then they then bought a company that actually made the kit that mixed the paint or mixed the ink or mixed the dyes. And I thought, oh, that's much more interesting. So I moved there. After a while, though, because that company was about 200 kilometers from home, and I got fed up with the traveling, I left, started on my own. About that time, people were moving from MS-DOS to Windows. I looked at CMFC and thought it was just too much like hard work. And then Visual Basic came out, and then I did some things with that, but it felt quite limited. And then Delphi 1 came out, and that was a revelation compared to what I'd been using before.
Yeah, and you said like 200 kilometers from your home. So your home is, thinking about the accent that you use, the UK, not Australia. And so the company was on the mainland in Europe, or where was the company located?
The company was in England. This was Berkshire, which is kind of south of UK. But the company they bought was in the north, near Manchester. And driving up Monday morning and back on Friday afternoon in the traffic is not much fun.
So just to understand, so you always work on projects that link technology with your programming in Delphi. So if we look in your office, which we can see in the background, you have lots and lots of parts, electronics parts, and a voltmeter or something like that in the background. So you use Delphi because you're able to connect to these devices easily, right? That was the first thing, and then databases to store all that information. I think those were the two key aspects that made you realize, oh, Delphi is it, right?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Exactly. With with Delphi, you can go from the user interface, database behind it, and then talking through IP port or through a serial port to the actual hardware. So yeah, you can do everything.
And obviously, like me, you started with a BDE, Boolean database engine, most likely. Then there
Yeah.
was a little bit of pain, because there wasn't
Mm,
really a lot
mm,
after. And now we're in heaven again with FireDAC being out there, which gives us like all the different databases in a unique way to access them.
exactly. So before I left the company I mentioned, the software I wrote for them was just MS-DOS. There was a database, actually C-Tree was an old thing,
Hmm.
which was okay. Um, and then I think about 3 years after I was working on my own, an ex-colleague came to me and said, "Oh, I'm working for a company that want to make dispenser machines for ink." So it's a packaging. So there's kind of anything you see in a supermarket that has, it says Mars bar or Tropicana fruits or
Hmm.
something. Any of those things, package printers make that packaging. So his company was selling ink and dispensers
Hmm.
to those companies and said, "Can you write a Windows program for us?" So I did. And that was based on the BDE. But back then, if a dispenser, all it needed to do was make the same color again and again and again, so they wanted a different color. As long as it was repeatable, that was it. So the database really didn't need to do very much. But as time
Hmm.
goes on, people want more reports. They want to know how much they used last month versus this month. They need to know if the ink is a solvent ink, so they have to report to the government how much solvent they emitted to the atmosphere. So this extends what the software needs to do. And then they want access to that data everywhere. And the BDE really was causing a lot of grief. I mean, I would say probably 90% of support calls were the database is broken. It needs
Hmm.
repairing. It was
Yeah, for,
so.
for the
But
younger.
then I had a project for a large dispenser with, I think it was, in the end it was over 20 panel PCs and other workstations, and I moved to Firebird, and that's been perfectly reliable. Touch wood. I've not had an error in
Yeah, for
that's 12 years.
for the younger generation out there, the BDE had two major downsides. It claimed to be client server, which never really worked. It was horrible to set up. And the second one, and that's why I'm a little bit uncertain, but I don't think it was thread safe in all of the operations. So it was very
Okay.
difficult to build an asynchronous um, program with it. And this, while we're talking about the devices that you needed to attach to them, I think back in the day, a lot of it wasn't USB because there simply wasn't any USB. It must have been serial communication. Even the
Mm,
mouse back then was serial port, a big one in the beginning, and then it became smaller and smaller. And so you must have used serial components to connect to
yep.
these devices, and it's asynchronous. I think in case you used the one from TMS, it's even called TMS async for the
Mm,
serial communication. And as soon as you have multiple threads and then want to write information back to the database, and your database framework or what you use, your component library, doesn't make it easy to write from threads into the database, that makes it
yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, that's right. And so I was careful to keep the control code away from the database, basically.
Hmm.
So it didn't do any of those things. So, but you've always got the problem of, first of all, just setting it up on the network.
Hmm.
Multiple PCs, setting the BDE up so you don't get lock errors and things is tricky. And then Windows changes, and you have to change settings to keep up. And it was just, if I'd gone with BDE for a system with 20 workstations, I wouldn't have time to talk to you. I'd be on the phone keeping customers working. It would be ridiculous.
So back in the day, you already mentioned the user interface. So you used the VCL, standard user controls, and I guess if you maybe even TMS grid, for example,
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
already there, if you wanted some additional features. And just for the process, and this is what I would like to point out in this interview, is you've learned something with Delphi 1, 2. You said you started with Delphi 1 and 2, and these same principles still apply today. You could
Oh,
still
sure.
use the T advanced string grid from TMS, and with a few tiny little changes caused by, I would say, Unicode and these kind of things, you would still be able to use that nowadays, just like you did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I can take old code that was written on Delphi 1 or Delphi 4 or something and run it now. You mentioned Unicode, and yes, that's probably the only big change I have to make because I'm dealing with serial devices which are bytes based. So there's some changes there. And of course, if you go to mobile, then strings have changed again. So that's a minor inconvenience, but yeah, you can
So,
take the same.
so by now you also use mobile, meaning like, I
Mm.
guess, Android devices, iOS devices, because you use Delphi. Are these the same kind of applications, or what do you do with mobile, and what do you
I
use?
have. So on these machines, these dispensing machines, they can go from anything. The smallest would be something like in a DIY store, which mixes paint for you. The largest would be something like 50 meters along with pipes everywhere, pumps, valves, lots of things. And when you're commissioning one of these things, you're in front of a bit of hardware and you want to control it, you want to turn something on, see if something's working. The electronics for that, it may be 50 meters away. The PC may be 50 meters away. So I wrote a little app to run on a tablet, so I can stand there in front of a machine and turn bits on and see them work in front of me. So that was a great thing. And to be able to write that in the same language that I was writing, day in, day out in Windows was great.
And control-wise, were there any difficulties for the user interface? Because I have to be honest, the number one thing that happens to me at conferences or TMS days or whatever public event is that people tell me, or developers that have been there for a long time, since Delphi 1, 2, or 5, or most likely 7 is a big version for a lot of people. They say they just can't get a handle on the mobile world to apply their concepts to the mobile world. So what would you think is the number one thing that helped you to get started with mobile? What was the first thing you did? How did you explore that space as a Delphi developer? What did you do?
Yeah, so really the first thing I did was to do with my hobby, which we've not mentioned yet, but I fly weather balloons, which go up into the stratosphere, take photographs, images, come back down, and then you drive across the country and pick them up from a field somewhere. And what people were doing before when they chased balloons, they would take a laptop, they would take a ham radio, which can weigh quite a bit, and you'd be walking across with an aerial and those. So here's an aerial. If you imagine laptop, my hands are already, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do this mobile? I mean, just use a phone for this. So basically, I've started working on different applications to receive data from the balloon. Obviously, every phone has a GPS, so it knows where you are. So if it knows where the balloon is, it can say, "Oh, the balloon's 100 meters ahead of you," for example, and home in. So I did some of those. There was a bit of relearning. I mean, FMX has got several changes from VCL. You have to deal with screen resolution. You have to deal with the orientation of the device. So there's a bit of relearning. And also my first application has a Star Wars, sorry, a Star Trek, I should.
Oh, you don't want to confuse those two.
No.
Well, I
Mistake to
confused you
make.
with my background because I have Star Wars left and right and Star Trek in the middle.
I have a Star Trek. The Star Trek, it's got an LCARS user interface.
Oh, that's cool.
So basically, the first thing I did with FMX was discover how styles work, to get that style so that all the buttons and labels and everything else look like LCARS device.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of reference, because I'm a nerd, so I know what LCARS is. LCARS is the user interface controls like they looked in the Star Trek series that started in 1987, the Next Generation. They didn't have that obviously back in the 60s in the original series.
No, no.
But then they invented like this, and it's all shapes with nice angles, and it's the how the buttons on the touch interface are designed. And what I always found cool, every button or each button has a number in the right bottom corner. Nobody knew
Oh,
what the numbers were for. We're like kind of IDs,
let's
so.
bother with that.
And it was kind of, and that's what he's talking about. And if you think of it, it's kind of like with violet, purple, yellow, kind of yellow tones in there. So those were
Hmm.
the user interfaces.
Yeah,
And
I've got some
as a
stuff here
kid,
I can show later. Yeah.
yeah, I'm as old. So as a kid, that was kind of cool seeing that on TV, them touching. And I remember back in the day, there was a guy that was called Bill Gates, and the other one was Steve Jobs, and they both said like, oh, in 10, 15 days, we're going to run around with tiny little pads, and we can use them like they use them on Star
Hmm.
Trek. And I was like, nah, that's way too early. And now
Oh yeah.
everybody, I mean, even our phones have that kind of stuff. So it's intriguing how technology develops. So yeah, and that's actually
Yeah.
the
So here's
reason
a
why.
here's
Oh,
a
that's so
speed.
cool.
You can see that.
Oh yeah,
And
that's so cool.
I have a in my car. I've got an off-road car for chasing balloons. That's how
Right?
serious this hobby is.
Yeah.
And
Did you build
uh,
controls for that, or is it hand-drawn using a paint box? How do you draw these LCARS controls?
oh, those no, they're carefully styled with shapes. So yeah, it's quite
Okay,
cool. Yeah.
cool. So do you have like a class library like for the corners and for the buttons, and do you have a
No, I should have
control?
done that, but no, I kind of just got something to work and
Oh,
haven't
okay.
made it.
And then so
Yeah.
that's rapid application development, and that's what I wanted to point out. It's learning by doing. You just start doing
Hmm.
these things, and that's what
Yeah.
is possible with Delphi, and is, I would say, impossible with a language like Java, which I experienced in college. You can't just fiddle around, build a user interface,
Mm,
and then it takes you weeks before you even have a button on screen. And then to position that in an absolute coordinate system is yet another thing can't do, because you need to define these layouts
mm,
that align the controls. And that is something that FireMonkey offers, of course, as well, layouts for automatic alignment. But TMS has the framework neutral controls. If you're scared to go into FireMonkey head first, because TMS now offers controls that you can use on the VCL side of things, and they work
mm.
the same way in FireMonkey, and you can use them then for your mobile application. So you didn't have that at the time,
No,
but
that was
nowadays
before, or at
that's
least before I was
possible.
aware of the neutral controls. But that said, I'm part of the way through porting this application to Raspberry Pi, so that'll be
Mhm.
under Lapsus, and then that uses FMC.
Oh,
But
okay,
it looks the
that's
same. It
interesting.
looks the same as FMS.
So exactly. So let's move over to the main course, so to speak. And you have the mug there, and I have. That was the reason why I contacted you. I didn't just say, "Hey, I'm into all this stuff myself." First of all, I live in Florida, so I'm pretty close to NASA here, to
Mm,
Cape Canaveral. I visited all the Apollo launch sites. I took the tour. I looked at the space shuttle that is basically, and then the big jet engines, propulsion engines that they hang in the halls, and you
mm.
keep walking for minutes and minutes and minutes, and when does this ever end? And then you get to this room which has the top of the rocket, and I couldn't get in. For I could, I, and my buddy, he was like 6'2" or something.
Mm.
They couldn't close the hatch. He was too tall. That's how small the moon capsule was that they launched to the moon, where the astronauts were sitting, and they were basically sitting like this, and I can't imagine sitting like this for 2 or 3 days. So that was definitely an experience as an engineer that I constantly repeat if we're not in a pandemic,
Mm.
obviously.
They are
And you
tiny.
share the same fascination, I think. And you even have, And now I'm going to hand it over to you so I don't say anything you weren't involved in or what you were involved in, but your software definitely had an impact on the current Mars rover project by NASA. Perseverance, is that the correct pronunciation of?
Yeah, that was an unexpected surprise. I was just sat at home watching TV. I think it's Friday last week, which was it Thursday? Perseverance happened, I think. And just watching the news on TV, and they said, "Oh, company in Devon, which is south of us in England, made the fabric for the parachutes." Oh, that's interesting, because a lot of my customers make textile materials, and there aren't many of those left. Most of that business moved to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the few that are left in kind of the West are companies that specialised. And I know a lot of them. So I kept watching, and they said, "Oh, it's this company, Heathcote Fabrics." Oh, that's one of my customers. And my first thought was, "Isn't that great for them?" Which it is. But my brain was running a bit slowly, and I thought, "Oh, if Heathcote's made the fabric, all of their finishing, which is the chemicals treatment to the fabric, all of their finishing machines have the chemicals fed to them from machines which I control, my software." So, that's quite interesting. So I mentioned this on Facebook, and but now, at that time I wasn't 100% sure. There was a chance that they'd had the finishing done out of the factory, but I was fairly certain. And then I called my customer Monday morning and said, "Hey, you're on TV and you worked on Perseverance." And the guy I deal with, he's a chemical technologist, and he said, "Yes, he developed, or he at least helped to develop this mix, which was silicone, which helps both with the unfolding of the parachutes and also with the strength of the material." So they all, I mean, lots of people in the factory worked on it, and obviously the machines they have in the factory are ones they bought from other suppliers, and one of them is me.
Oh, it's so
cool.
Just with the mixing of the materials, that all comes back to the knowledge way back Delphi 1.2 for the paint mixing, right? It's kind of like the same. So, from a software perspective, you basically tell something to open up to release the materials into the mixing bowl, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so exactly that. So the one thing that's common amongst all of the applications and all the types of machine is you're taking a recipe formula which says, "I want so much of this, so much of that, so much of those," just like cooking basically, and I want those mixed together, and that's it. Now within that small key thing, the applications could be package printing or leather dyeing or textile printing, textile dyeing. One customer makes parts that, well, chemical that ends up in catalytic converters and cost about $10,000 a kilo. You don't want to mix that to the wrong component, wrong mixture.
That's right.
So there's a wide variety of those, but the key thing is it's a recipe, and you make it, and you keep making it the same every time. So when that chemistry gets applied to a material, it always has the same effect. Or if it's a color you're making, it's always the same color day in, day out. And then the type of machines vary as well. You said about dispensing one at a time. You can weigh them, so it's a gravimetric weighing, or you can do it by volume. You can have a flow meter, so the machines work in different ways. But all of that is encompassed by the software I write, which is generic in terms of the type of machine it can control, and generic in terms of the way the customer uses it, because some customers just go to the machine and say, "I want this mixture 20 kilos go." Other customers may say, "I want to make 2,000 meters of this pattern. What do I need to do?" And the software does it for them.
Without giving any secrets away, do you control the machine directly, or do you have something like a PLC in between?
Yeah,
that carries your know-how.
There's something akin to a PLC. It's basically an I/O card that's a serial port, and you send messages to it to turn the different outputs on and off.
Hmm.
There is some real-time involvement, and that's offloaded to the card. So
Hmm.
if I need to dose a very small amount of something, I need to open a valve and close it within maybe 20, 25 milliseconds, and that's done by the card.
And that is all still desktop based, or what is your approach to these applications? Or is it, do
They
you supply the library and they can build either desktop or web or?
Right. So what I supply is the whole program, the software,
Mm-hmm.
and quite often um, I will. So my customers are either manufacturers of the machine, so I will develop the software with them and send it to them, and then they deal with it after that. Or usually it's systems where the original manufacturer doesn't exist anymore, or not
Mm-hmm.
interested, or not providing good service. In which case I will be on site installing software, setting everything up for them, calibrating the machine, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, so no, my customers don't deal with libraries as such. They just have a computer or a panel PC or something that
Mm-hmm.
does the job they want. And
And panel PC is still Windows desktop machines, and or what do you have to deal with nowadays?
mostly these days it's a panel PC by the machinery,
Mm-hmm.
but usually there will be a separate um, server somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Usually come for that for large companies, they will have their own servers, and we install the database on
Mm-hmm.
usually a VM on one of their servers,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they will have people in offices where they're controlling what recipes they want to make.
Mm-hmm.
People in offices running reports off of what was used, and also more and more there's links to other software. So
Mm-hmm.
companies will have their own system that keeps control of stock and everything in the factory. Um, the dispenser will tell it when it's using something from stock, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so are you still able to apply the VCL knowledge, or would you say, hey, what I learned for the VCL had to be replaced by something like FireMonkey or the web, or can you
No,
still use?
It's all VCL. So they're panel PCs with embedded Windows, which is just a cut down version of Windows.
Yeah, I'm really smiling internally because like I remember several conversations I had in when I started off in the community in 2004. There were so many people at conferences telling me, "Oh, VCL is dead. You know, you have to switch over to .NET." That was 2004, 2005, and I
Yeah.
have to laugh out loud. Now the humankind is basically landing on Mars, and the one of the primary parts, the parachute, the material was mixed, not with a just-in-time compiled application, no, with the application compiled in Delphi with VCL user interface. So
Yeah.
there you go. That's one of the predictions that didn't come true. At the time, by the way, in all fairness sake, I have to say we already mentioned Steve Jobs. But Steve Jobs and also Bill Gates, they always said like native code won't go away as quickly
Mm,
as some people think it will. And I think now even we see some kind of resurgence of people realizing that a lot of this stuff doesn't work with just-in-time compiling, and native code definitely has its advantages that can be created with Delphi or Lazarus for the Raspberry Pi. And that is also something I want to mention, the just the sheer amount of platforms that you're able to supply to, because you mentioned like I think you held up an iPad, which is iOS. I've built several examples with Android, even with Amazon Kindle Fire TV. I also have my Raspberry Pi right here that works fine
mm,
just as well, and all these different platforms, and Linux, of course. How could we forget Linux and the macOS desktop? All of these platforms, and you have one language which is Object Pascal, and I don't I don't there's a lot of, I mean, the only thing I think where you could achieve the same thing just as easily is writing a web application, where I would say, is it really easy to write web applications compared to using the VCL as a Delphi developer? And that is something uh, I would like to know also because I obviously have written a book for Delphi developers to develop web applications
Hmm.
with TMS Web Core. Um, so the web definitely is something that is in everybody's mind. Also, the new technologies to access databases on the web using web services. Have you any experience with that? Do you need to use it now, or are your customers like, no, we don't want to hear about that? So have you dived into the web yet or not?
Yes, right. The short answer for that lot. Yeah, so I'm still using the VCL. So really, I have two parts to my life developing wise. And one is for the dispensing customers, and that's all VCL because Windows is fine. There's a little bit I mentioned one earlier requirement for mobile, but not so much these days. Not so much yet. But on my ballooning side, then yes, I've got on ballooning side, I've got Android, iOS, um, TMS Web Core I've been using for doing dashboards so
Mm-hmm.
that people can follow the flight live online and watch what's going on. I've got some examples I can show you for that. The data is collected centrally, and I've got Linux server software as well, and it's all in Delphi.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's quite a wide variety. And you mentioned Android and iOS, even, let me show you this. That's Delphi on a
Mm-hmm.
watch
GPS coordinates,
as
yeah,
well.
it's in
GPS
Europe, that's
coordinates.
sure.
So that's kind of knocked up
I
application
was,
for chasing
I,
balloons on a watch.
yeah, I was born
In Delphi.
51, and then the other coordinate is a 7, not a -2. So that's why I know you're more off to the west
That's
from
correct.
us. Yeah, my dad's a pigeon racer, so I know a little
Okay.
bit about GPS coordinates and distances. Okay, I mean, if you've seen my book on
Hmm.
uh, FNC Maps, which is another interesting thing, which is a mapping framework, which is also multi-platform cross-service. So you can even use, like, let's say you like the maps that Apple provides because they have more detail in your city, and then
Hmm.
you have like a direction service which is better in the UK. Then you can mix those and draw the directions from, let's say TomTom, which is one of the supported ones, on a Google map, and these kind of things. And Delphi gives you, yet again, the flexibility to do that with multiple target frameworks. And of course, also Raspberry Pi is also supported as far as I know.
Well, why would you do that? Obviously, one of the things chasing a balloon is you want to see a map.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very well knowing the balloon is 200 meters ahead of you. You want to know, is there a road? Is there a public footpath I can get there? So to have a map on a mobile device, especially if you can change provider, you can open OpenStreetMaps, for example, and you can use the Ordnance Survey, which is the kind of off-road type map.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect for
Mm-hmm.
tracking, for chasing balloons. So yes, and to be able to use FNC maps both on the mobile device and on my TMS web core
Mm-hmm.
application, I can just cut and paste code between the two. And
Okay, that's
it's
that's a great argument. You can copy paste some of the code.
yeah,
Um, that's efficiency right there.
yeah.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel twice,
No,
and
I
that's what a
already know
lot
it
of people
works, so
struggle with.
I'll just copy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now with the latest release, you even must smile a little bit more because the you always fight with asynchronicity before even most people were affected by it. Like that's the number one customer concern I have. How can I make sure that my code waits so I
Mm,
get the result of something? Because people think like, oh, ask a service for some, I ask a service a question and I need the reply now. And that's not how the web works. And in your
that,
industry, that's never how it worked. You say,
no,
hey, open the valve, and then hopefully at some point you're going to get the result. It's closed again after so many seconds or
exactly.
whatever.
You can't have you can't write code that says open that valve, wait for this wait to increase. Stuff happens all the time. Um,
Exactly.
and I, about 2 years ago, worked on a system with 3 dispensers actually in series. So if you imagine, I want to fill this with something, and it
Hmm.
moves along actually on a conveyor belt, stops, some things go in, goes to another position, some more things go. And because the customer wants things to happen quickly, you have possibly 3 of these containers at the same time being dispensed. So you've got 3 sets of valves, 3 sets of pumps, 3 weighing scales, plus at the end there's a mixer, plus there's a guy pushing tubs on at the beginning. Everything happens. I mean, when I watch it, I can't even, because I'm watching a mimic screen with all this happening, you know, copies of the hardware basically happening on a screen in front of me, and I can't keep up because there's too much happening at once. You have to do things asynchronously.
Yeah, and one thing I always give as an example coming from the processing automation technology, you fill something up, you have a machine going, moving, doing something, and with safety in mind, there always has to be a button somewhere where somebody can push and say it all shuts down. And this button is not going to be power off. This button 99% of the time is going to send a signal, process off. And if you don't have like some way to basically tell your process to stop or something like that, and your application is blocking, waiting, that's not going to be possible. I mean, obviously emergency shutdown is implemented on a hardware level, but just for the understanding that your application needs to be able to process input, user input at all times is very important. And otherwise, I think you wouldn't be able to display your dashboards either. Your dashboards get data at the same time while your other process is monitoring like how, if the valve is open, closed, and then the process, so to speak. You also mentioned to me what I found very, very interesting, because I haven't seen many examples of that, diagramming, that you actually use process diagrams, and you use software tools, I think even from TMS Diagram Studio, to implement those with step 1, 2, 3, and if this happens, then that happens. And you use those, again, in Delphi to facilitate a process without having to implement it all by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I do when there's a new type of machine is I draw it on a piece of paper, and I'll draw it in I'll write a program that is a pretend dispenser. Because as you can see, I don't have any dispensers in here. And I know I want to do as much as I can before I get to site, so that when I go to a customer or start working on a new machine, I expect it pretty much to work. Not straight away, because there's always a difference between a real machine and what I have. But the first thing is to draw the machine, all the pumps, valves, pipework, everything else, and then animate that in the program so that, for example, if I have a wire that's a signal that goes to a pump that turns the pump on, which starts filling a vessel, I'll have a picture of a vessel, I'll have a picture of the valve that's going to, on the pump that's going to open. And when I send a signal to this program, it will behave like a real machine. And then that's an EXE, and the interface to that is a TCP/IP port, which behave exactly the same as the serial ports to the real machine. So then I can test my software as if it had a dispenser attached, and I can then repeat. Sorry?
And that must make the usage of web applications pretty easily, because web application can communicate easier with TCP ports or HTTP ports or protocol, instead of using serial communication. You're not able to use serial communication in any of your web applications.
I've not built any web applications for that sort of application before, but yes, you could. What happens? So I start with an emulation of the machine. The next job is to write the control software, which might be different for different machines. For some, you can dispense multiple things at the same time. Some you have to do it serially, whatever, and write that code and test it with the emulation. None of this really has a user interface as such. And then there's a third program, the main program, which the customer sees, which has got the mimic diagram with all the valves and everything else. And that just receives TCP/IP messages from the dispenser program. So if And the nice thing there is they can have that panel. They can have lots of them around the factory if they want.
Hmm.
A guy can sit in an office and see his dispenser operating.
I've seen
Uh,
something similar on SCADA systems and
I was going to say this is
mines.
not a new. I've not invented something new here.
No, I've seen
New
it.
PLCs in factories, SCADA systems, they're exactly the same.
Yeah, I've seen it in a salt mine, basically
Mm,
where all the
mm,
conveyor belts are. Conveyor belt one is running, and then they monitor it, like what is running right now, and then they also have like a monitor for their reserves, and then you see the little truck arriving, and the salt goes into the truck. The storage
yeah,
gets less, and then the
it's
next
fun.
truck pushes more, so the conveyor belts put more salt in there. And at the end of the day, they can run a report how efficient they were.
Mm,
Like did they get enough salt for the day or too little and that kind of stuff. So similar approach. And what I found out by asking a little bit back there, of course, everything is PLCs,
mm,
but all native. There wasn't a single, nobody was talking about any Java or .NET or anything
yeah.
like that. It was all built on, and the machines were all Windows. So there was nothing um, that wouldn't have been possible really with your software, Delphi. And I'm quite sure your generic approach would even give them the ability to use that with their own filling machines and stuff like that,
Mm.
even if they were interested. So that's really exciting software you're building. And
I
what
had
I
one
find,
customer who basically insisted on it being PLCs. They said, "Oh, we have
Mhm,
Siemens PLCs in house, and you must build it with that." And interestingly, Siemens PLCs you can program in Pascal.
mhm.
So that was quite nice. So the control side in Pascal, I just wrote normal Pascal, and it worked, as expected.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
to know because the
but
structured text, what I learned was very similar to Pascal. The structured text, they have
okay,
different,
okay.
and it will
Uh,
always seem to be similar, but I've never
mm,
gotten that deep into PLC. I just had to learn the different function blocks and then
yeah,
the language, which is like the assembler language, and then you have like the newer models. What is it? Step 5, step 7. They
it's just
have yeah, they have these structured text, they call it, I think,
mm,
and that looks like Pascal to me. I got to
yeah,
be honest with
it,
you.
it is basically Pascal. So that's what I use. You have a choice between that and assembler, which seemed too much like hard work, and then there's ladder logic, which is the old stuff, which I, I think you have to have a special sort of brain for ladder logic. But so the Pascal was fine. What wasn't so fine, or wasn't so much fun, was the user interface, which is like, I don't know, Visual Basic -1 or something. It's just very difficult.
I know exactly what you're talking about. They have like their and with Siemens, it is their own standard. It's kind of. I always say, why are you complaining about it? You're not complaining as much if you use an Apple device. Siemens is basically for me kind of like Apple in the automation industry. They have
Mm,
everything standardized to their own standard, and I know this so well because when I was at college, they were trying to find like a common PLC language, a PLC standard,
okay.
and these kind of things. And then there were like other companies that were implementing this standard, but Siemens said, no, 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 we have step 5, we have step 7, and that's our product. And I always liked it because it was, as you said, it looked very similar to Pascal for me, so I never had
Hmm,
problems with it. The only problem was, and I haven't looked deeply into it, but other providers, they started to integrate into Visual Studio at the time with their user
okay.
interface and all that stuff. But I don't know how far they have gotten. Otherwise, I only know what you just said, like building dialogues was very, very different or difficult on the PLC controllers. It's not as
Yeah.
easy, you know.
I
So.
remember at one point I wanted a button on the user interface to do something or other. And the easiest thing was for the button to set a flag in the PLC and then
Mhm.
do the work in Pascal and send the result back. It was just crazy, really. But the user interface was
People,
so difficult. That was the best.
what people also forget is how easy Delphi makes it to actually have an event attached to a graphical element,
Mm,
and to I mean, we write this every day in Pascal. We say I equals 5, and we declare I as an integer. What goes on in the background, you have to do that in your PLC programming yourself. As soon as you have like a value that has that is not just a positive value like a word, as soon as you have like an integer, you have different lengths and different, you have to be aware of all of that, how long your registers are.
Mm,
For some
mm,
data types, you need to reserve 2 registers, and then you
mm,
have the starting address. And then if you get a PLC program from somebody, and that person tells you, hey, publish this in a web service or publish these values so I can access them, you get some kind of table which says like, okay, this starts at byte 15. At byte 15, you get a long integer, which is 4 bytes. And then to convert that back and forth, that's what, if you write a VCL application in Windows, that is something that Delphi does for us. And this is something that on a
mm,
PLC, you have to do that all manually. So
mm.
you really forget about what the compiler and everything takes away from us, makes it easy to handle.
Yeah.
So to round this off, you have a very long career with Delphi, and I think you're one of the people who would say you don't regret it one bit to have gotten in touch with Delphi, and you still use it today. So anything you want to add on that? Like, how do you see, for example, your future with Delphi? What are the areas that you would like to investigate in the next couple of months? What are you looking into right now? And for example, Delphi 10.4.2 has just been released.
Mm.
So why is that release exciting to you in particular? What are you going to work on in the next couple of months in your Delphi interests?
Yeah, so my main thing at the moment is to round off my suite of programs for balloons.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got quite good applications. They're both in the Android store. I need to put them on. Well, I have them running on iOS. I checked earlier, and actually iOS is updated and they don't run anymore. So I need to get that
Mm-hmm.
fixed. Um, but also the whole dashboard bit, which is getting data from the balloon to a web server, a Linux server, hosted server, and then to dashboards on people's in people's browsers.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to finish that work. So that's what I'll be doing. I've not loaded 10.4.2 yet, but that'd be pretty soon. A big change. I mean, when I started with Delphi, it was Windows only, and Windows really hasn't changed much
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. But mobile changes every few months,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have an app that all of a sudden, as I've just found out, doesn't work anymore because iOS has changed and something's happened. So what it means now is you can't sit with the same version of Delphi for long. It's okay. I still use Delphi 2009 for
Mm-hmm.
my dispensing work, but I use whatever's the latest basically for all the mobile because I have to.
Mm-hmm.
So it means you really nowadays you need a subscription, I think,
Yeah.
and keep up to date with everything. So I have a pro subscription for Delphi, and I have the TMS, everything you can eat.
Yeah.
So, but,
So you know about
what
the
I found,
benefits.
what I found was once I went to mobile, then I think, oh, there's a TMS thing, I could use that as well. So I started just with the user interface
Mm-hmm.
components and async, and then I very quickly realized I was going to be buying not all their products, but several of them. So I just
Mm-hmm.
put sub, and which it pays for itself very quickly, especially things like the map. That I can
Mm-hmm.
use the same map on everything. It's great.
Yeah, the
Um,
mapping, I mean, you should know I wrote a 500-page book about it, how much I like the
yeah,
maps.
uh, yeah, and yeah, no, mapping obviously for ballooning is very important. So,
Mhm. Do you also use elevation? Because I know that
yeah,
that TMS added that rather recently, the elevation of points. Is that useful to you for the ballooning? Like
I
that,
set the elevation. Does it do a drop shadow now? I know Google Maps has that as a function.
I don't know.
So it will
I would
show
have
as
to
the
look
balloon
in the
gets
latest
higher,
release.
it shows the shadow underneath, so you can tell visually roughly
Oh,
how high. Yeah.
well,
Uh,
that is
apart from
something I'm
check.
going to to really engineer about today. Do you have drop shadow for Dave yet?
And there was a request I made which did get implemented, which is when you, because I set different map markers.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a map, balloons for markers and the car and one or two others as well. And there's a bugbear that there was an assumption that the bottom left corner, I think, was the longitude latitude.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you had a large marker, it wouldn't actually be where. So when as you
Yes,
zoom in and out, the things.
so they center it now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So
sometimes the problem is that the API, and that is why FNC Maps is so great, because you don't need to, as a developer, you don't have to think about it. TMS are the ones who think about it.
Yeah, and there's a problem at the moment with there's an online map which most balloonists use, and it's a Google map, and over time it has more and more users, and it keeps hitting the limits for the free calls on the API, and without the community getting together and paying a bunch of money every month to Google, we're stuck with halfway through the kind of accounting cycle, it says development mode only, and with FNC you just say, okay, that's fine, we'll use something different.
You just use the open maps layer, and that's boom. Yeah. And if Google ever changes their policy, it's one switch, and then you back with the other provider.
Precisely.
Yeah. So thank you again, Dave. I think you have shown the Delphi community that you can use Delphi for various purposes, and also I think you don't give your software away for free, so you used it to basically finance your business, and I think that is a very good example for developers who are deciding right now, should I even bother looking at Delphi? I think Delphi is very much worth looking into. And then it is also great that you mentioned the third parties that basically help you to become even more efficient, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every day.
Yeah, for me, the fact that it's not just my familiarity, it's that Delphi is very efficient environment to write code in. I had a call many years ago. It was for a race series, not Formula One, but kind of a step or two steps down, called A1GP. And they had all of the cars had radio transmitters, so they transmit live telemetry, which the guys in the pits could pick up. But I think they've been contracted to provide live telemetry for TV as well. So you see that, if you watch Formula One, you can see
where each car is.
Oh, he's doing 150k and he's got 3Gs and all this stuff. Well, they had a very similar system for A1GP, and they had someone doing the on-screen graphics. And then I think someone realized what they didn't have was a link between the radio system and the TV. So I had to call about that because I knew someone who worked there, and said, "Oh, can you do this?" And they said, "Oh, will you write it?" And so I'm writing in Delphi if I do the work. "Oh, well, we use C++ in-house." I said, "Well, this needs to be done in 6 weeks, I think it was." Either it's Delphi or I can't do it in that time frame. So I did it. And that was quite exciting. So I got to go to Silverstone racetrack and for testing. And again, actually, I wrote the first thing I did was write a pretend car that sent out. I think that had about 100 parameters on the telemetry at 10 updates per second. So that's 100 times 10 per second times 22 cars, and they had 2 radio receivers opposite sides of the track. That's quite a lot of data, asynchronously coming in to an app that mustn't block when you do something.
So you better have a running number in the package, so you know which one is first.
So you better do things asynchronously, use threads if you need, that kind of thing. So it worked really well. So yeah, I was quite proud of that. But there's an example that, if you make yourself productive with the experience and a productive environment, you have that fleet of foot, if you like, that if there's a requirement for doing something in a short amount of time, you can do it.
Yeah, great. I mean, you're basically saying what I as an evangelist try to tell people. It's worth
Mm.
looking into, and you can always find negative aspects about anything, but there's also so many positive stories out there, and yours is definitely one of them. So I would like to thank you for devoting your time to
Okay.
this interview. Thank you so much, and hopefully we can get an update on your balloon project now and then. I know you keep us updated on your blog. If you want,
Mm.
we provide the link to your blog on the comment
Yeah,
section
for
of
sure.
the
Yeah.
video, and that will give people the ability to get in touch with you if they have questions about what you do and your balloon
Mm.
projects,
Yeah.
or even potential customers if they don't need to mix color or ink or whatever their
You never know.
or even a mine customer who needs to monitor his mine. So
Yeah.
that might all be happening. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good day. Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you.